The early morning sun barely peeked through the hospital windows as Dr. Sarah Chen finished her night shift at Memorial Hospital. Her dark blue scrubs showed signs of a busy 12 hours. Small wrinkles around the knees from crouching to check patients, and a tiny coffee stain from when she had rushed to answer a code blue at 3 a.m. Even after 6 years as an emergency room doctor, she still carried herself with the same military precision she learned during her time in the Air Force. Sarah's colleagues often joked that they could set their watches by her routine. Every morning, she would finish her charts exactly 15 minutes before shift change, give a detailed briefing to the incoming doctor, and then head to the staff locker room to change into her civilian clothes. Today was no different, except for the slight spring in her step. She had managed to save 3 critical patients during her shift. Another successful night? Dr. Chen asked Nancy, the elderly cleaning lady who always seemed to be mopping the same spot near the locker room. Sarah smiled warmly at her, remembering how Nancy had been the first friendly face she'd seen when she started working at Memorial. Yes, Nancy. Mr. Rodriguez from room 204 finally stabilized, and the twins from the car accident are going to make it. Sarah's voice carried a hint of pride mixed with exhaustion. She opened her locker, pulling out her neatly folded clothes, a crisp white button-down shirt and black slacks. As she changed, Sarah caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. At 32, her face showed the determination that had carried her through 2 tours as a combat medic in Afghanistan. Her black hair was tied back in a neat bun, a habit she never broke from her military days. The small scar above her right eyebrow, a reminder of her last tour, was barely visible now. Walking through the emergency room one last time before leaving, Sarah stopped to check on the twins she had mentioned to Nancy. 8-year-old Tommy and Timmy were finally sleeping peacefully, their mother dozing in a chair between their beds. Just 12 hours ago, they had arrived covered in blood and glass after a drunk driver hit their family car. Sarah had worked for 3 straight hours to save them both. Dr. Chen? A small voice called out. It was Tommy, stirring from his sleep. Are you leaving? Sarah walked over to his bed, careful not to wake his brother or mother. Yes, buddy. But don't worry, Dr. Williams is here now, and he's really good at telling jokes. This made Tommy smile, despite his bruised face. As she headed toward the hospital parking lot, Sarah checked her phone. 3 missed calls from her mother, probably worried about her working night shifts again, and a text from her best friend reminding her about their planned lunch next week. The morning air was crisp, and the parking lot was quiet except for the occasional arrival of early shift hospital workers. Sarah's silver Toyota Camry sat in its usual spot, space number 247. She had chosen this spot specifically because it was under a security camera, another habit from her military training about always being aware of her surroundings. The car was nothing fancy, but it was reliable, just like her. Before starting the engine, Sarah went through her usual morning checklist. She adjusted her mirrors, checked her gas gauge, half full, and made sure her hospital ID was properly displayed on the rearview mirror. Next to it hung her Air Force dog tags. She kept them there as a reminder of where she came from and what she had overcome. The radio came to life with the morning news as she pulled out of the parking lot. Sarah half listened to the reporter talking about local events while mentally planning her day. She needed to get some groceries, maybe catch a few hours of sleep, and then prepare for her volunteer shift at the Veterans Clinic later that evening. The streets were beginning to fill with morning commuters as Sarah drove through the familiar routes of Portland. She loved this time of day, watching the city wake up, seeing shopkeepers raising their shutters, and joggers with their dogs enjoying the cool morning air. After years of military precision and emergency room chaos, these quiet moments felt precious. Little did Sarah know that her peaceful morning routine was about to be shattered. As she stopped at a red light, she noticed a police cruiser in her rearview mirror. Officer James McNally was behind the wheel, and he had already decided that something about Sarah's car warranted his attention. The next few minutes would test everything Sarah had learned in both her military and medical careers, though she didn't know it yet. The light turned green, and Sarah drove on, unaware that this ordinary morning was about to become anything but routine. The morning traffic moved steadily as Sarah's silver Camry made its way through the residential streets of Portland. She had just turned onto Maple Avenue, a quiet street lined with old oak trees, when the flash of red and blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror. Officer James McNally had been following her for the last 2 blocks, his police cruiser keeping a steady distance. Sarah checked her speedometer. She was going exactly 25 miles per hour, the posted limit. Years of military discipline had made her a careful driver. She signaled and pulled over smoothly, positioning her car close to the curb. The muscle memory from her Air Force training kicked in as she turned off the engine, placed both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2 o'clock, and waited. Officer McNally sat in his cruiser for an unusually long time, running her plates. Through her side mirror, Sarah could see him talking into his radio, his face showing signs of irritation even from a distance. Her military instincts told her something wasn't quite right about his behavior. Finally, heavy footsteps approached her window. Officer McNally was a tall man, probably in his mid-40s, with a thick neck and a permanent frown etched on his face. His hand rested casually on his holster, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Sarah's trained eye. "License and registration," he barked, not bothering with the usual police greeting. His tone was sharp, unnecessarily aggressive for a routine traffic stop. Sarah kept her movements slow and deliberate. "Of course, officer. My registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for it now." She narrated her actions clearly, just as she had been taught in the military when approaching checkpoints. "Just hurry up," McNally snapped, his fingers drumming impatiently against his holster. As Sarah reached for her documents, her hospital ID swung slightly on the rearview mirror. McNally's eyes narrowed at the sight of it, but he said nothing. She handed him her license and registration with both documents facing up, easy to read. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" McNally asked, his voice carrying an edge that seemed to sharpen when he looked at her face. "No, sir, I don't," Sarah replied calmly. "I was following all traffic laws and signals." McNally's jaw tightened. "You ran the stop sign back at Oak Street." His statement was firm, but Sarah knew it wasn't true. She had stopped completely, just as she did at every stop sign. "Officer, I respectfully disagree. I came to a complete stop at Oak Street." Sarah's voice remained professional, the same tone she used when dealing with agitated patients in the ER. "Are you calling me a liar?" McNally's voice rose slightly. He shifted his weight, moving closer to her window. "Step out of the vehicle." Sarah's mind raced, but her exterior remained calm. "Officer, may I ask why you're asking me to exit the vehicle? I just finished a 12-hour shift at Memorial Hospital, and I'd like to understand the reason." McNally's face reddened. "I don't care where you work. When an officer gives you an order, you comply." His hand gripped his belt tighter. Sarah noticed two things simultaneously: the security camera on the convenience store across the street, and McNally's body camera light, which should have been on but wasn't. She reached slowly to her phone, keeping it visible. "Officer McNally," she said, reading his nameplate, "I'm going to call your supervisor. I believe there's been a misunderstanding, and I'd like to." "Out of the car, now." McNally's voice boomed as he suddenly grabbed her car door handle. The early morning quiet was shattered by his shout, causing a few nearby birds to scatter from their perches. Sarah remained seated, her hands returning to the steering wheel. "Officer, I am Dr. Sarah Chen from Memorial Hospital. I'm a former Air Force combat medic, and I know my rights. Please state your reason for asking me to exit the vehicle." McNally's face contorted with anger. The mention of her military service seemed to further agitate him. He reached for his radio, calling for backup, but his eyes never left Sarah. The situation was escalating quickly, and Sarah could feel the tension building like a thunderstorm about to break. Across the street, the convenience store owner had stepped outside, phone in hand, quietly recording the entire interaction. The morning sun cast long shadows across the scene, as two more patrol cars turned onto the street, their sirens silent but lights flashing. The routine traffic stop was about to become anything but routine, and Sarah knew the next few moments would require every ounce of her training and self-control. The morning air grew thick with tension as Officer McNally's backup arrived, their patrol cars creating a semicircle behind Sarah's Camry. The convenience store owner across the street wasn't the only one watching now. Several residents had emerged from their homes, phones raised, sensing that something was very wrong about this traffic stop. "I said, get out of the car." McNally's voice cracked with barely contained rage. His face had turned a deeper shade of red, and a vein pulsed visibly on his forehead. He yanked the door handle again, but Sarah had engaged the locks when she first pulled over, another habit from her military training. Sarah remained composed, though her heart was racing. "Officer McNally, I'm going to reach for my phone and call your supervisor. Your body camera isn't on, and I have the right to." Before she could finish, McNally slammed his fist against her window, making the glass rattle. "Last warning. Exit the vehicle, or I'll break this window and drag you out." The other officers hung back, exchanging uncertain glances. One of them, a younger officer named Rodriguez, stepped forward cautiously. "McNally, maybe we should." "Stay back," McNally barked at his colleague. "This one's resisting arrest." Sarah's medical training kicked in as she assessed McNally's behavior: dilated pupils, aggressive posture, irrational anger. She'd seen these signs before in the ER, usually in patients experiencing severe emotional distress or worse. Taking a deep breath, Sarah pressed the record button on her phone, placing it on the dashboard where it could capture everything. "Officer, I am not resisting. I am requesting your badge number and supervisor's presence before exiting my vehicle, as is my legal right. I have done nothing wrong." McNally's response was to unclip his baton. The metallic sound of it extending made several onlookers gasp. Officer Rodriguez took another step forward, looking increasingly concerned. "Badge number 47,831, Sarah continued calmly, her voice clear and steady. "Officer McNally is threatening me with a weapon during a routine traffic stop. I am an emergency room physician at Memorial Hospital and a former Air Force combat medic. I am unarmed and have not broken any laws." The growing crowd of witnesses had their phones trained on the scene. Some were live streaming, others recording. The morning sun caught the silver of Sarah's hospital ID, still swinging gently from her rearview mirror. McNally suddenly stepped back, his face twisting into a sneer. "Out! Now!" He raised his baton, aiming it at her window. Sarah's combat training screamed danger, but she remained still. "Officer Rodriguez," she called out to the younger officer, "please note that Officer McNally is escalating this situation without cause. I am requesting immediate supervisor presence." Rodriguez reached for his radio, but before he could use it, McNally swung his baton at Sarah's window. The glass didn't break, but spiderweb cracks appeared across its surface. Several people screamed, and more phones came out to record the incident. "That's property damage and assault, Officer McNally," Sarah stated, her voice somehow still professional. "Your body camera is off, but there are at least 12 witnesses filming this interaction." McNally's response was to swing again, this time hitting the window hard enough to send small pieces of safety glass scattering across Sarah's lap. The sharp edges glinted in the morning light like tiny diamonds. "McNally, stop," Rodriguez shouted, finally moving to intervene. But McNally was already reaching through the broken window, grabbing for Sarah's arm with his free hand. Time seemed to slow down. Sarah saw everything with crystal clarity. McNally's fingers closing around her wrist, the pieces of glass still falling from the window frame, Officer Rodriguez running forward, the horrified faces of onlookers, and the red recording lights of dozens of phones. In that moment, Sarah knew she had a choice. She could submit to this illegal assault and trust the system to sort it out later, or she could defend herself using her military training. The decision had to be made in a split second, but the consequences would ripple out much further than this quiet street in Portland. As McNally's grip tightened painfully around her wrist, Sarah's mind flashed back to her combat training. She knew exactly what she needed to do, and more importantly, how to do it without causing serious injury. The next few seconds would change everything, and Sarah was ready. The morning breeze carried the sound of approaching sirens. Someone had called 911, but for Sarah and McNally, it was already too late for outside intervention. The situation had reached its breaking point. Glass crunched under McNally's boots as he yanked Sarah's arm through the broken window. His face was twisted with rage, but Sarah's military training had taught her something crucial. The angrier the opponent, the more mistakes they make. In one fluid motion that surprised everyone watching, Sarah pressed her car's door unlock button. The sound of the lock releasing was barely audible, but its effect was immediate. McNally, who had been pulling against the locked door, suddenly lost his balance as the door swung open. Sarah moved with the precision of someone who had practiced these moves hundreds of times. Her feet found solid ground as she stepped out of the car, using McNally's own momentum against him. Her movements were controlled, each action calculated to neutralize without causing harm. "Stop resisting," McNally shouted, still gripping her wrist, trying to force her into a submissive position. But Sarah wasn't resisting. She was responding with textbook military defensive techniques. As McNally attempted to swing his baton, Sarah executed a perfect wrist lock, her fingers finding the pressure points that every Air Force combat trainer had drilled into her memory. The baton clattered to the ground, rolling under her car. "Officer McNally," Sarah's voice remained steady, even as she moved. "I am not resisting. I am protecting myself from excessive force." Her words were clear, meant for the dozens of cameras recording the incident. McNally tried to reach for his taser, but Sarah had already transitioned into her next move. Using his own weight and momentum, she performed a standard military restraint hold. Her movements were so smooth that several onlookers later described it as looking like a choreographed dance. In less than 3 seconds, McNally found himself face down on the asphalt, his arms secured behind his back in a hold that any military or law enforcement professional would recognize as legitimate and non-damaging. Sarah's knee was placed precisely on his back, applying just enough pressure to maintain control without causing pain. "Officer Rodriguez," Sarah called out calmly, "I am maintaining this restraint hold using standard military procedure. Please note that Officer McNally is not injured, just secured. I request immediate supervisor presence." The crowd had grown larger, and the morning sun illuminated the scene like a spotlight. Officer Rodriguez approached cautiously, his own body camera clearly activated. You could see that Sarah's hold was professional and controlled, the same type taught in police academies. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying a mix of respect and concern, "I can see you're trained. Please maintain that hold until our supervisor arrives. He's 2 minutes out." McNally struggled briefly, but Sarah adjusted her grip slightly, using pressure points to discourage movement without causing pain. Her medical training was just as present as her military experience. She monitored his breathing and made sure his airways were clear. "You're gonna pay for this," McNally growled, but his threat sounded hollow now. The crowd could see who the true professional was. Sirens grew louder as more police vehicles approached. Sarah maintained her position, her breathing steady, her movements minimal but effective. Years of combat training had taught her that control was more important than force. The convenience store owner had walked closer, his phone still recording. "I got everything," he announced loudly. From the moment he pulled her over. Everything. Sarah noticed small details even in this intense moment. The morning dew on the grass nearby, the sound of birds returning to the trees, the reflection of police lights in the broken glass on the ground. Her medical training helped her stay focused, monitoring McNally's condition even as she held him. Officer Rodriguez spoke quietly into his radio. "Supervisor, be advised, the subject is a military veteran using authorized restraint techniques. Situation is controlled but requires your immediate attention." The growing crowd of onlookers had fallen silent, watching with a mixture of awe and respect. Many had never seen someone handle a situation like this with such professional calm. Sarah's hospital ID badge had fallen out of her shirt during the scuffle, catching the morning light as it hung from her neck, a reminder that this woman who had just expertly subdued an aggressive officer was also someone who saved lives for a living. Police cars were now blocking both ends of the street, and the heavy footsteps of the approaching supervisor could be heard. The next few moments would be crucial, and Sarah knew it. She maintained her hold, steady and professional, waiting for proper authority to arrive. Captain Maria Rodriguez stepped out of her unmarked police car, her stern expression showing she understood the gravity of the situation immediately. The morning sun cast long shadows across the scene. A broken car window, a scattered crowd with phones raised, and most notably, one of her officers pinned in a textbook restraint hold by a woman in hospital scrubs. "Status report," Captain Rodriguez commanded, her voice carrying the authority of her 20 years on the force. She received multiple calls about this incident, including one from the police commissioner himself, who was already seeing videos of the confrontation spreading online. Officer Kevin Rodriguez, no relation to the captain, stepped forward. "Ma'am, Dr. Sarah Chen, emergency physician at Memorial Hospital and former Air Force combat medic, was pulled over by Officer McNally. Situation escalated when McNally broke her window and attempted to forcibly remove her. Dr. Chen defended herself using military-approved restraint techniques. Captain Rodriguez surveyed the scene, noting the growing media presence at the edges of the police barrier. Local news vans were already setting up their equipment. Her eyes landed on Sarah, who maintained her professional hold on McNally without wavering. Dr. Chen, the captain addressed Sarah directly. "I'm Captain Rodriguez. I understand you're using military-approved restraint techniques?" "Yes, Captain," Sarah replied calmly. "Standard Air Force combat training, non-damaging hold. Officer McNally's airways are clear, and I've been monitoring his vital signs. I'm ready to release him to your custody whenever you're prepared." The captain nodded, impressed by Sarah's composure. She turned to two trusted officers she had brought with her. "Johnson, Wallace, prepare to secure Officer McNally." To Sarah, she added, "Dr. Chen, on my mark. Please transfer custody." The transfer was executed with military precision. As Sarah released her hold, Officers Johnson and Wallace smoothly took control of McNally, who had finally stopped struggling. The entire crowd watched in silence as McNally was led to a patrol car, his face a mask of suppressed rage. "Dr. Chen," Captain Rodriguez said, "I believe you treated my nephew in the ER last month. The one from the motorcycle accident." Sarah's professional demeanor softened slightly. "Tommy Rodriguez?" "Yes, Captain. He had a complex fracture, but he's recovering well. He should be cleared for physical therapy next week." The captain's face showed a flash of recognition and gratitude before returning to its professional mask. "I need to see all available footage of this incident." She turned to the gathering of witnesses. "Anyone with video, please stay to provide statements." The convenience store owner stepped forward immediately. "I have everything, Captain," from the moment he pulled her over. "No stop sign violation. I watched Dr. Chen stop completely. Been seeing her drive past my store every morning for 3 years. Always follows traffic rules." More witnesses came forward, phones extended, each with their own angle of the incident. Officer Rodriguez had his body camera footage ready, though McNally's camera had mysteriously remained off. Sarah stood quietly, finally able to feel the small cuts on her arm from the broken glass. A female officer brought her a first aid kit, but Sarah politely declined. "I have supplies in my medical bag," she explained, reaching carefully into her car to retrieve it. Captain Rodriguez watched as Sarah professionally cleaned and bandaged her own cuts, noting how the doctor's hands remained steady despite everything that had just happened. The captain had seen enough in her career to know this situation could have ended much worse if not for Sarah's training and restraint. "Dr. Chen," the captain said, "we'll need your formal statement. But first, would you like to call someone? Family? A lawyer?" Sarah shook her head. "No need for a lawyer, Captain. Everything that happened is on video, and I followed my training exactly as I was taught. But I should call the hospital. I'm supposed to be back for my next shift in 12 hours. The morning had fully arrived now, the street busy with official vehicles and investigation teams. News reporters were setting up for their live broadcasts, and social media was already buzzing with videos of the incident. Captain Rodriguez looked at Sarah with newfound respect. In all her years on the force, she'd never seen someone handle such a volatile situation with such professional calm. This incident would have far-reaching consequences, but for now, she had a more immediate concern, ensuring that Dr. Sarah Chen received the fair treatment that Officer McNally had failed to provide. The Internal Affairs Office on the 3rd floor of Portland Police Headquarters buzzed with unusual activity. Lieutenant James Harper, a veteran investigator with salt and pepper hair and tired eyes, sat at his desk reviewing footage from the McNally incident for the 12th time that week. Multiple screens displayed different angles of the confrontation, each telling the same damning story. "Play it again," ordered Chief Williams, who stood behind Harper's chair. The department chief hadn't slept much since the incident went viral. On the main screen, they watched Sarah's perfect execution of the restraint hold once more. 23 complaints, Harper said, shuffling through McNally's personnel file. 23 prior complaints of racial bias in the last 3 years, and somehow he stayed on the force. The lieutenant's voice carried a mix of frustration and regret. Down the hall, Sarah sat in interview room B, her posture straight and professional despite being there for 4 hours. Unlike most people who entered that room, she showed no signs of nervousness. Her lawyer, provided by the Air Force Veterans Association, sat beside her, though she had barely needed to speak. One more time, Dr. Chen, the internal affairs investigator, asked, "Can you walk us through your assessment of the situation?" Sarah nodded, her voice clear and clinical, like she was presenting a medical case. Officer McNally displayed multiple signs of aggressive escalation: dilated pupils, irregular breathing patterns, excessive force without provocation. As an ER doctor, I recognize these as indicators of someone not in full control of their actions. The investigator's pen moved quickly across his notepad. On the table between them lay Sarah's military records: 2 tours of duty, multiple commendations, and certification in advanced combat training. Next to these sat her hospital ID and a letter from Memorial Hospital's chief of surgery praising her judgment and professionalism. Meanwhile, in another part of the building, Officer Rodriguez gave his own statement. "I knew something was wrong the moment I arrived on scene," he explained. "McNally wasn't following any protocol. When I saw Dr. Chen's military ID, I tried to intervene, but McNally was already out of control." The investigation had expanded beyond just this one incident. Teams of reviewers were going through McNally's entire career history. They found a pattern: traffic stops targeting minorities, escalated situations, and reports written to justify his actions. But this time was different. This time he had chosen the wrong target. Back in the chief's office, the command staff gathered for an emergency meeting. The wall-mounted TV showed news coverage of the incident, which had now gone national. Experts were praising Sarah's restraint technique as a model for police training. "We need to get ahead of this," Deputy Chief Martinez argued. "Dr. Chen didn't just defend herself, she showed us a better way to handle these situations. Her military training, her medical background, she did everything right." Chief Williams nodded slowly, looking at the stack of reports on his desk. The FBI had already called, wanting to review the department's training procedures. Police academies from 3 states had requested copies of the incident footage for training purposes. In the hospital parking lot, security cameras captured several officers interviewing staff about Sarah. Her colleagues' responses were unanimous. She was known for her calm under pressure, her ability to de-escalate volatile situations in the ER, and her commitment to treating everyone with respect. Last month, a nurse told the investigators she talked down an armed man in the ER. He was scared, on drugs, threatening everyone. Dr. Chen just walked up to him, calm as could be, and within 5 minutes, he was crying in her arms, letting her help him. The investigation's findings were becoming clear. Sarah's actions weren't just justified, they were exemplary. Her military training had shown a better way to handle confrontations, one that protected both officers and civilians. Lieutenant Harper added another document to the growing file: a proposal for new department-wide training protocols based on military de-escalation techniques. On his desk, McNally's badge sat in an evidence bag, probably never to be worn again. As the sun set on another long day of investigation, Sarah's case was becoming more than just an incident report. It was turning into a catalyst for change, a moment that would reshape how the department approached training, accountability, and community relations. The rhythmic hum of printers filled the office as Harper's team prepared their final report. This case would be studied in police academies for years to come, not just for what went wrong, but for how one person's professional training and composure showed a better way forward. 2 months after the incident, Memorial Hospital's largest conference room was filled to capacity. Community leaders, police officers, medical staff, and local residents sat together, many for the first time. At the front of the room, Sarah Chen stood beside Captain Rodriguez, both women addressing the diverse crowd that had gathered for this unprecedented community dialogue. "What happened that morning wasn't just about one traffic stop," Sarah explained, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "It was about how we can do better as a community." The projector behind her showed statistics from the past 2 months. A significant drop in confrontational police encounters since the department had started implementing new training protocols. In the front row, the convenience store owner, Mr. Patel, nodded in agreement. His store had become an unofficial community meeting point since the incident. The broken glass from Sarah's car window still sat in a small display case behind his counter, next to a framed photo of him with Sarah and Captain Rodriguez. Last week, Captain Rodriguez added, "Our first group of officers completed the new de-escalation program." She gestured to a group of officers sitting near the back, including Officer Kevin Rodriguez, who had been promoted to lead trainer for the new protocol. The changes were visible throughout the community. Police officers now regularly attended hospital staff meetings, learning medical perspectives on handling people in crisis. Meanwhile, medical staff provided training sessions on recognizing signs of distress and mental health emergencies. Sarah's phone buzzed quietly, another message from the growing list of departments across the country requesting her input on their training programs. She had already spoken at 3 police academies, sharing her unique perspective as both a combat veteran and an emergency physician. Yesterday, Sarah continued, "I treated a young man in the ER. He was scared, combative at first, but one of our newly trained officers was there. Together, we were able to calm him down, get him the help he needed. That's what this is all about, working together." The audience included Tommy Rodriguez, the captain's nephew, now fully recovered and wearing his physical therapy success story shirt. Next to him sat some of Sarah's regular patients, including elderly Mrs. Wilson, who had organized a community support group after the incident. Local business owners shared their experiences of improved police interactions. The owner of Joe's Diner described how Officer Rodriguez had diffused a potentially violent situation using the new techniques. "He handled it just like Dr. Chen showed them," the owner reported proudly. At the back of the room, news cameras rolled quietly. The story had evolved from a viral video of confrontation into something more meaningful, a model for community transformation. National media had dubbed it the Chen Protocol, though Sarah always insisted on calling it the community effort. During the question and answer session, a teenage girl raised her hand. "Dr. Chen, because of you, I decided to join the Air Force after high school. I want to learn to be strong and helpful like you." Sarah's eyes moistened slightly as the room erupted in applause. The meeting continued into the evening, with small groups breaking off for focused discussions. Police officers and community members who once viewed each other with suspicion now sat together, sharing coffee and ideas. The hospital's usual antiseptic smell was overwhelmed by the aroma of donated food from local restaurants. In one corner, Sarah spoke with a group of young officers, demonstrating proper restraint techniques. Her movements were precise, educational rather than confrontational. The officers took notes, asked questions, and practiced with each other under her guidance. Captain Rodriguez watched from the doorway, remembering how different things had been just 2 months ago. The department's complaint rates had dropped by 40%. Community trust was growing. Even the most skeptical officers had begun to embrace the new approach. As the meeting wound down, Sarah found herself surrounded by people wanting to share their stories. Tales of better interactions with police, of fear being replaced by understanding, of small but significant changes in their daily lives. Outside the hospital windows, the sun was setting on Portland, casting a warm glow over the city. In the parking lot where Sarah parked every day, a new security camera had been installed, not out of fear, but as part of the community's commitment to transparency and accountability. The incident that could have divided the community had instead become a bridge, connecting people who might never have spoken to each other otherwise. As Sarah gathered her things to head home, she knew that this was just the beginning of a longer journey toward lasting change. 1 year after the incident, Sarah Chen stood at the podium in the Portland Police Academy's main auditorium. Behind her, a large banner read "Community First, New Era of Police Training." The room was packed with police officers, community leaders, and media representatives from across the country. "Today marks the graduation of our 100th class under the new training protocol," Sarah announced, her voice carrying the same calm confidence that had turned a crisis into an opportunity for change. The graduates sat in their crisp uniforms, each wearing a special pin that combined medical and law enforcement symbols, a design chosen by community vote. In the front row, Captain Rodriguez smiled proudly. Her department had become a national model for police reform, with departments from Los Angeles to New York sending representatives to learn their methods. The training program, now officially named the Community Response Protocol, had shown remarkable results. Our emergency room visits involving police confrontations have dropped by 70%, Sarah continued, gesturing to the statistics displayed on the screen behind her. But more importantly, public trust in law enforcement has reached its highest level in 20 years. Officer Kevin Rodriguez, now Sergeant Rodriguez, sat with his training team. They had refined the program over the past year, combining military de-escalation techniques with medical awareness and community engagement. Every new officer now spent time shadowing both emergency room staff and community leaders as part of their training. The changes went beyond just training. The department had installed new oversight systems, body camera protocols, and community review boards. The convenience store owner, Mr. Patel, now served as chair of the Civilian Oversight Committee, bringing his business experience and community connections to the role. Last week, Sarah shared, I watched one of our graduates handle a situation that, a year ago, might have ended very differently. She described how the officer had used her training to calm an agitated man, recognizing signs of medical distress rather than assuming criminal intent. That man is now receiving proper medical care instead of sitting in a jail cell. In the audience, former Officer McNally's case served as a silent reminder of the old way of doing things. After a thorough investigation, he had been dismissed from the force and was now working as a security guard in another state. But even he had reached out to apologize, admitting that the incident had forced him to confront his own biases. Sarah's phone buzzed quietly in her pocket, probably another message from the National Police Training Board. They had been working to implement similar programs across the country, using Portland's success as a template. The Air Force had also taken notice, incorporating some of the community engagement aspects into their own training programs. But our work isn't finished, Sarah reminded the audience. Each day brings new challenges, new opportunities to prove that protection and compassion can work together. She gestured to the graduating class. These officers aren't just learning how to enforce laws, they're learning how to be part of their community. The ceremony continued with the presentation of badges, each one representing not just authority, but a commitment to the new way of doing things. The graduates had completed not only traditional police training, but also basic medical response courses and community engagement programs. After the ceremony, Sarah walked through the training facility's halls, now lined with photos showing police officers working alongside medical personnel and community members. One photo showed her treating a patient while an officer calmed the person's family, a scene that had become common since the new protocols were implemented. Outside, the academy's parking lot had been transformed into a community garden, tended jointly by police officers and local residents. It was a small change, but it symbolized the larger transformation, turning spaces of potential confrontation into places of cooperation. As Sarah prepared to leave, a young recruit approached her. Dr. Chen, your story inspired me to join the force, she said. I was a nurse before this, and I never thought I could be both a healer and a protector. Sarah smiled, remembering her own journey from Air Force medic to ER doctor to unexpected catalysts for change. The incident that could have been just another tragic headline had instead sparked a revolution in police training and community relations. Looking out over the academy grounds, where new recruits practiced de-escalation techniques alongside medical response scenarios, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The system was changing, not through force or confrontation, but through understanding and cooperation. 1 year had passed, but the real work, the daily effort of maintaining and improving these changes, was just beginning.